Hi, this is Kyle Haynes with Technically Speaking at Source Allies. Today we're going to talk about HTTP interfaces in Spring. These were introduced in Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3, so if you're using those in your app, you're in for a treat. These are really lightweight interfaces that you can make in your code that make it very easy for Spring developers to talk to other REST APIs and other applications outside of your own. These are very similar in feel, and we'll get into it, but they're very similar in feel to if you've used Spring Data and their repository pattern, where you extend an interface and you magically get all these cool ways to interact with your database. These are very similar. So let's dive in really quick here, and we'll see where we get. So what I have here is a Spring Boot application that isn't a whole lot of code. The main thing that we're going to interact with here is getting posts, so you can envision like blog posts. Maybe we have an API that exposes blog posts for a front end. So we have a posts REST controller, very typical Spring code here that you'll be seeing that gets posts by an ID. So maybe you have a blog post that's ID'd 1, and we want to get the contents of that blog post. For purposes of this, we're going to get the blog posts like the user ID associated with it, the ID, the title of the post, as well as the body. And so what we've got is we had our post controller is going to call to a posts service, and posts service is going to use REST client. Now REST client is kind of newer. You can think of it as a similar thing to REST template. So if you've used REST template or web client, if you're using reactive, either of those three really all are ways to make it easy for you to interact with other APIs over REST. So REST client is newer, so we're using that for today. What we have set up right now is we are going to make a call to this JSON placeholder website. They provide a free HTTP REST interface that we can call to get things like blog posts and users and articles and all that stuff very easily by just hitting it. And there's no authentication, so it's just like if you're trying to do example demo apps, it's a really fun one to use. So what we've got is a REST client. This is, again, allows us to make HTTP calls. We're going to make REST client.get, so it's an HTTP get to this URL, posts/post ID, given an ID. We want to accept JSON. We're going to call retrieve on it, which means I want to get it, and when I get it back, I expect the body to be this post record, having a user ID, string title, body, all that good stuff. So I'm going to start this up really quick and show you where we're at. So if I make this post call here, a get to posts 1, I'll see I got a 200 back, user ID 1, the post ID is 1 because I passed in ID 1. Here's some random post title and a random post body. Same thing will happen if I ask for post 10, but I'll get slightly different data. Pretty straightforward, right? So as an app developer today in the Spring world, what I would usually do is, right, your boss would come in and say, hey, that's cool that we can get a post by ID, but what if we want to get all the posts, right? So we'd make a public list of post, get posts, and we would return posts service dot get posts. Kind of a lot of boilerplate stuff. Get mapping posts. And in our post service, we'd get posts. And, it's not hard to believe, but get posts is very, very similar to getting a single post. So you kind of would go in here, and like if it was me, I would copy and paste this thing. So I got get posts. Doesn't take in an ID because we just want all of them. And we're going to call just all posts. We're not going to provide an ID. And the only difference is the body we get back is this weird parameterized type reference. What that will give us is a this is a list of posts. What this parameterized type reference is, it's a parameterized, we get a list of posts that come back versus a single post, so we can't just use the class. And that's it. So as you can see, we should, if I restart the app now, we should be able to just go all posts, and we'll pull this guy up. And look at that, I got all these posts 0 through 100. It works great. I still have the ability to get a single post. All cool. Now, if we take that even a step further, you can see where we're going here, but I can take this a step further and think maybe we need to be able to delete a post. So we've got a public void delete post. And you know what? It's going to look pretty darn similar to what we've had in the past. And again, we're just copy pasting code. We're going to do a delete posts /ID with an ID. And then there's going to be no body. We're just going to make the call. That's a void. And then again, in our REST controller, if we're going to map this together, we're going to call delete mapping. Delete mapping, sorry. Delete mapping of posts with an ID. And this is a path variable ID, and we call delete post. And that should be pretty much it. You can kind of see where we're going here, where this is, it's not bad code, but right, like at this point we've got, I don't know how much this is, 30 lines of code maybe, that's all around kind of the same thing. You say REST client, go get this thing, do it at this URL, I want JSON, I want the body back, I want to convert into this type. It's just clutter. So right, if you're building an API that's going to interact with several other services, which I do day to day at my job right now, you know, you might call a post service, and then you're going to call a user service, and then you're going to call something else, and you combine all this data together. You end up with a lot of this boilerplate code and a lot of stuff you don't really need. All right, and so that's where these HTTP interfaces come in, which I thought were really cool. So we are going to build a brand new bean, but first we're going to kind of define our interface for what we want this to look like. So this would be the interface between our application and some external API we're calling. So it's just an interface, and we'll call it, I don't know, HTTP interface for fun. In reality, we'd probably call it something different. And the only thing we have to define on this is like the contract between, or the contract of what our provider, the API we're calling, what they give us. So if we're getting a single post, you can do post, get post, path variable, int ID, int ID. That looks like a normal Java interface. There's nothing fancy here. The only fancy thing that's going to happen is Spring has these things called exchange mappings. So you can provide a get exchange, and what that will do, you give it the list of, or you give it the address at which, this is the address that the consumer or the API you're calling at, that's where their endpoint is. So I'm going to call the posts ID endpoint, and I expect it to give me a post. And by using get exchange, it means I'm going to run an HTTP get against this. So there's a little bit of Spring magic here, and sometimes I know people don't like Spring magic, but this is actually kind of cool. Where it's at right now, we can't use this interface because we only have the interface definition. We need to actually create an instance of the bean first. So we're going to make a new bean. Oops. We're going to make a new bean, and we're going to call it public HTTP interface, and it takes in not a REST template like it tried to help me with. It takes in a REST client because that's what we have down below defined. Our REST client down here. I'm actually going to stick this interface, or sorry, that bean definition down in here, so that way they're created together. So we're going to create this REST client, and this REST client is already set up to call our JSON placeholder URL. The REST client could also be configured to do things like conversion. You know, maybe the API I'm calling does dates in a weird format. I'm going to convert them on the fly back when I eat them on my side. Same with API keys, authentication tokens, all that stuff you could do in one spot in the REST client. So we're going to build this new HTTP interface that takes in that REST client. And here there's an HTTP, I believe it's proxy factory, service proxy factory. So we're going to build a new HTTP service proxy factory .builder 4. And this takes in an HTTP exchange adapter. So remember we talked about the get exchange up here. So the exchange adapter is an adapter that knows how to take our REST client or a REST template or a web client, whatever we're using, and convert it into these annotations for us. So this is now REST client builder. Oop, not REST client builder. Wrong thing. REST client adapter dot create, and we're going to give it our REST client, and then we're going to build it. So we've got a proxy factory, and then this bean, remember we're trying to create an instance of this interface. So we'll just use proxy factory. We'll say proxy factory, create me a client, and create me an HTTP interface client. And that is about how easy that gets. So we've now created our HTTP interface bean, and then we can use it. So instead of even needing to use post service at all and all this junk that we've got up here, we can come into our REST controller. We can just bring in our HTTP interface, we can inject it into our constructor, and then now when we get a post, we don't need to use post service at all. We can just use HTTP interface, get post, and we give it an ID. So if we rerun this, we should see when we get a single post like this one, we got our value back. Very, very cool. And now it's really easy for me as an app developer to come add new things. So like before, when we had to go from get a single post to get multiple posts, right? We copy this 9 lines of code. Delete post, we copy all this code. What we can do is we can just get rid of post service completely. And what we'll do is on the interface now, we'll let Spring do some of its magic, right? So we had get a post. We also define list post, get posts. And that doesn't take in anything. Again, this is a get, so it's a get exchange to /posts. Oh, if I could spell /posts. And we're going to delete a post. So we'll say void delete post. That's going to take in an ID, but we also need the path variable. That path variable annotation basically takes this ID and slams it into the URL here for us. And this will be a delete exchange to /posts/ID. And then back down here in our REST controller, we got rid of post service, all that code we didn't need anymore. Cleaned it up, get rid of post service, and now this is HTTP interface, get posts, and HTTP interface, delete posts. So if we rerun this, we should see it start up. We should be able to get a single post. We should be able to get all the posts. Yep, and we should be able to run a delete to one of the posts, and everything works great. Super cool, and again, it saves us a lot of boilerplate code. I hope you can envision yourself writing APIs that need to interact with other things, and it's a heck of a lot easier for me to write a couple things here, and when I need to come add a new thing, I add 2 lines of code. You write an exchange, and you write the contract, and you let Spring handle the rest. Super cool, something I ran across just recently with a project I'm working on, and I just wanted to share. So that has been HTTP interfaces in Spring. Hopefully you can check it out. Again, this has been Kyle Haynes with Technically Speaking at Source Allies. Do you have a topic you'd like to see covered? Comment it down below, and check out sourceallies.com to learn more about us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.